This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. Episode 655. I'm Amy Brennan, your newly promoted co-assistant editor, along with Alicia Caparasso, and I am your host for this story. Our story for today is one of my old favourites, brought out for an encore episode to celebrate my promotion. Our story today is The Carmel Crazies by Rick Kennett. Rick Kennett has had horror and SF stories published in several magazines, anthologies and podcasts, including Tall Tale TV, Pseudopod and Cast of Wonders. He won 2 Parsec Awards for podcast stories in 2013, a year that also saw the publication of his novel The Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. One of those Parsec Awards was for the Cast of Wonders episode 71. A revised edition of his 2002 collection 472 Shane Walk, Carnacki, The Untold Stories, will be reissued soon from Cathaven Press in the UK. Though not yet dead, he can sometimes be found wandering cemeteries, necrotourism, or working as the podcast reporter for the M.R. James journal Ghosts and Scholars. This story is narrated by Marguerite Kenner. Marguerite Kenner is a dual national American living in the UK. She's the president and CEO of the Escape Artists Foundation, the US 501c3 non-profit dedicated to bringing free and accessible audio short fiction to a global audience. She's a multiple Hugo Award nominee alongside Alistair Stewart for their weekly pop culture newsletter The Full Lid, and was the editor for Cast of Wonders from 2013 to 2019. A practicing technology lawyer, Marguerite loves performing in audio dramas and playing video games, often where people can watch. When she's not at genre industry events advocating for the power and value of audio short fiction, she's mentoring and teaching legal and business skills to independent creatives. You can follow her adventures and see the photos of her cat on Blue Sky. And now, we've a tale to tell.
The Carmel Crazies by Rick Kennett. On the day she turned 17, Saida Gertsch peered through a window into rusty red desert and saw her future squatting darkly in its launch cradle. She'd been discharged from hospital an hour before and had made her quick way to Styx City Airport. Standing now at the window into Launch Cradle 3, her bag slung over the shoulder of her new Martian Star Corps tunic, she gazed through the glass like a kid outside a toy store. Utopia Plane, her new toy, smooth, black, ellipsoid, seemed to squat in its cradle amid a patch of the red desert of Mars. Recently repaired after a battle with Xenoid starships at Rigel, the starship's liquid lines were unbroken but for the pressure tunnel extruded from her forward hatch. A thing of space, it seemed to sit impatient to lift into the pink-brown sky and the void beyond. All her fears and excitements came flooding back, a feeling of elation at this new beginning aboard her first ship, a scary feeling, too, of coming adrift, separated from her family on Phobos, and the surrogate family of her space cadet section, training days ended. Inspecting herself in the window's reflection, Sai adjusted her tunic, sporting its new lieutenant's bars, and ran a hand through her short, dark hair, wondering if she'd surprise her new captain with her age. She thought she might. She was the first of her breed, a product of the Gartino genetics experiment, to qualify for active service. It all depended on what Captain Ralph Brown was like. Would he understand and appreciate her as a purpose-built person, trained and schooled 17 years for this purpose? Or would there be suspicion and mistrust? Taking a last critical look at her reflection, she rubbed at the scar on her left arm, a souvenir of the tragic accident in the asteroid belt 12 days ago. She'd been in hospital since then, getting bone restructure, and knew the scar would be a constant reminder that she was human after all, and not the genetically engineered superhero she used to think she was. Sai presented her credentials to the lieutenant standing in Utopia Plane's forward hatchway. He regarded her from his 7 or 8 year superiority in age and space experience. Maybe he too had scars, as the ship had scars. Unlike her own, though, they'd probably not be the product of a stupid accident. From the way his eyes flicked from her face to her lieutenant bars and back to her youthful open face, she could tell he was judging her by appearance alone. Is this our new navigator? Is this our new gunnery officer? Is this who takes over if something happens to the captain? Yes, she thought in answer. I am. My name is Peters, he said. I was the first lieutenant. I suppose I better take you to see the captain. In the control room, she met Captain Brown, a dark-haired man, early 30s, tallish and slightly stooped. Though he didn't regard in anything like a judgmental way, his handshake had quavered a little as he realized just how young his new first lieutenant really was. Welcome aboard, Mr. Gertsch, he said nevertheless, and though she knew he meant it, Cy wondered just how welcome she was. She was too aware of being a new thing, an unknown and untried thing. Stowing her gear in her cabin, she unfolded and hung up a hologram on the wall, a 3D image of her late friend Joss and herself in their trainee vac suits, standing amid the majesty and thin snow at the very top of the Martian volcano Mount Olympus, highest peak in the solar system. Taken a year ago when they'd both been 16, it already seemed like another world a lifetime ago. We're on the shores of space, Joss had said atop the mountain that day. Utopia plane lifted an hour later, gravity rings rippling down the hull, acting on all atoms at once, causing no G-forces within. As Mars shrank on the aft view screen from a red ball to a sparkling blood diamond, and with Cy busy at astrogation, Captain Brown opened an intership channel. Listen up, people! This is the captain. Our destination is Carmel B, the secondary of a main sequence binary star system 700 light-years distant. Our mission is to support the Terran vessels already there and to curtail xenoid attacks on the planets of that system. Because the Martian Star Corps is a small force compared to the Terran fleet, the Earthers tend to underestimate our capabilities and potential. At Carmel B, Utopia Plane will show them how incorrect that view is. That is all. 3 hours later, now accelerated to 70% of light speed, Utopia Plane arrowed into the dimensional limbo of subspace, where a short line was not necessarily the shortest path between 2 points, and the speed of light was not the speed limit of the universe. When not on watch in the control room, Cy studied astrogation, strategies, and tactics, playing simulations on the ship's computers. Twice she played chess with the captain, and was twice defeated. I'm no good at stylized warfare, Captain, she said, pushing her chair back from a second checkmate. The real thing's not like chess. It's brutal, random, and often unfair. It's like someone once said, it's magnificent, but it's not war. The captain, with his first-hand knowledge of what war was like, nodded agreement as he collected the chess pieces. Do you know who said that? Cy cocked her head to the side, thinking. Duke of Wellington? No, Marshal Bouquet, a French observer at the Battle of Balaclava in 1854. He was watching a brigade of British light horse charge a battery of Russian heavy artillery they mistakenly thought they'd been ordered to attack. A gallant but useless action that ripped them apart. C'est magnifique, mais ce n'est pas la guerre. So what famous remark did Wellington make? Captain Brown leaned back in his chair. Ah, yes, the Iron Duke. The night before the Battle of Waterloo, he said of his troops, I don't know what they do to the enemy, but by God they frighten me. Having decided, like Marshal Bosquet watching the charge of the Light Brigade, that chess wasn't war either, Cy instead sat in on poker games, played with other crew members in the mess deck. Its chance and dare and bluff appealed to her. And they drilled, practicing abandoned ship and gravity loss, decompression and first aid, as well as battle stations and damage control, accompanied by jolts and buffering contrived by colliding gravity rings fired simultaneous from bow and stern. Sometimes the captain stepped back and let Cy take charge, and sometimes he left it to Lieutenant Peters, the officer who'd met her at the hatch with that judgmental matter. She was sure he still viewed her with caution, as something a little suspect. And the captain... She had yet to decide what Captain Brown really thought. Despite his genuine welcome and his satisfaction in the way she carried out her assigned drills, he seemed to regard her with a vague uncertainty. Then 2 torpedoes went crazy, and there was no time for games and uncertainty. Utopia plane emerged from subspace at the edge of the Carmel B system, her crew at battle stations, ready, watching, finding nothing. The rippling gravity rings tilted, and the ship curved towards the bright pinpoint of the star. Vanishing, she reappeared a second later millions of kilometers further in, where the frozen gas giants rolled. Again and again, she skipped in and out of dimension, never in one place long enough to present a target. Now cruising an asteroid belt, then passing the rocky middle worlds, each time closing within the white disk of Carmel B. Seidegertz turned from astrogation and said, "Crazies?" Captain Brown, sitting amid instruments and repeater scans, reread the message just received and nodded. 2 of the new Mark 9-1 torpedoes were launched by a Terran ship in an engagement with a Xenoid vessel. They failed to self-destruct as they should after the enemy eluded them. They're now described as units tactically cyber-conceptual malfunctioning, which is basically command speak for crazies. That's why it's not a good idea to give ordnance real thought, said Lieutenant Peters at the weapons control. Hardly real thought, Mr. Peters, Sai said. Put thinking under a neutron warhead, and the thing would never want to explode. Then where would we be? Once a weapon is launched, it has to think for itself, so the 9-1s were given just enough pseudomind to do so. They were just coming online in the Terran Star Corps when I was doing my last ordnance classes. But where there's mind, even artificial, there's always the possibility of madness. Interesting, the captain mused. I best discuss this with our torpedo people on the weapons deck. Sai, you have the comm. Continue dimensional skipping till we get into the inner system where the torpedoes were lost. He glanced across at Lieutenant Peters. Frank, once we're stabilized in real space, start a standard search pattern. He left and Sai slipped into the captain's chair. Now finally she was no longer just babysitting in the nothingness of subspace or overseeing exercises. Now she was in command of a starship in real space. As she looked up over the instrumentation, she felt like saying, "Steady as she goes, Mr. Peters." But Utopia plane was still weaving in and out of dimension, and Frank Peters, now at astrogation, was watching her. She thought as perhaps others in the control room were also watching her. This was it. The experimental test tube teenager, the new thing, the unknown and untried thing, was now in charge. She said, "Mr. Peters, check that we have correct identification override codes for the Mark 9-1s. No good if our weapon systems lock out because they identify the torpedoes as not enemy." Frank Peters turned to his task without acknowledgement, something he should have done. Sai frowned and was about to remind him of proper procedure when 3 things happened. Bang, bang, bang! Utopia plane dropped out of subspace on its last dimensional skip, dropped almost on top of a swiftly moving white blur on the close-range scan. The blur immediately vanished in a swell of bright light engulfing half the screen. The ship lurched starboard, throwing everyone in the control room to the deck. Scrambling back into her chair, Sai snapped open a line to environmental control. "Report status," she said. Their ability to continue breathing had priority over other damage reports. To her relief, she found life support systems still functioning. However, Frank Peters looked anything but relieved. "Weapons decks badly damaged," he said, adjusting the earpiece, whispering him the evil news. "Damage also to the drive. The hull's breached with decompression in sections 17, 18, and 20. Casualties and people missing." "The captain?" said Sai. He paused, a finger to the earpiece, then said, "Still unaccounted for." Before Sai could properly realize the full import of what this meant for her and for the ship, a line buzzed from scanners. "Target bearing 350 by 010, range 1.5 million kilometers and closing." Sai looked at her repeater screen. A white blip at its edge was moving inwards towards them. Even without reading the electronic tag flickering beside it, she knew it was for one of the Crazies they'd been assigned to kill. That explosion could only have been its companion finding them first. By sheer bad luck, they'd emerged from subspace right in their track, and now it looked like the hunter was the hunted. As Lieutenant Peters sent out a distress call to the nearest Terran base in the system, Sai said, "Helm, come to new course 180. Crank acceleration up to 100G. Let's give this crazy torpedo some space." The crewman at the helm snapped, "Aye, aye, ma'am," but a moment later added, "Helm sluggish to respond. Getting power fluctuations. Acceleration rate erratic." "Range now, 1.2 million in closing," said scans. "Mr. Peters," said Sai, "now would be a good time to download the ID override code for that torpedo to our lasers." He turned to her with a look of barely controlled calm. "Computers say we don't have that code." "What?" "Seems Terran Command has not yet seen fit to pass this info on to their ex-colonial ally. Our weapon system is recognizing them as friendly and won't fire on them." Sai cursed. "Then why the hell were we sent to chase these crazies when we haven't been given their ID override code?" "Just another example of the right hand of High Command not knowing what their left hand is doing. Welcome to the real world, Mr. Gertsch." Sai slid him a sideways glance, then checked Utopia Plane's acceleration and course change. Neither was moving fast enough for her liking, and the crazy torpedo was gaining on. She looked up sharply. Someone had begun to pray, a quiet, personal murmuring. From the helm? From one of the monitoring stations? Did it matter? She was the closest thing they had to God right now. The thought was exhilarating. The thought was frightening. "We can't outrun it, and we can't shoot it," said Frank Peters, stepping up beside her. "What are we going to do?" Sai studied her screens while absently scratching the scar on her arm, and remembered promising she'd never again think herself a superhero. But now, she reflected, was not the time to be keeping such promises. "Trust me," she said. "Trust you to do what?" "What I'm about to do in the next few seconds, well, just don't think me crazier than I actually am." He shrugged a shrug that plainly said, "What could be crazier than the present situation?" Sai regarded him coolly a moment, then smiled a little secret smile. "Frank, what Earthy said, oppose whatever our enemies support? Could that also mean contradict everything your enemy says?" "Does that matter?" "It'll matter in a moment. Helm, come about 180 degrees. Frank glanced at the repeater screen, for the moment not registering the order she'd just given. The torpedo, larger now, closer now, showed more distinctly, showed sharper outlines and detail. "What a ugly thing," he said. "Not at all," she said almost admiringly. "Yeah, they're ungainly looking, angular and blunt, but they don't have to be aerodynamic or impress anyone. They're handsome beasts in their way, all brutal power. That, I think, is what I like about them. They do their job with elegant efficiency." "The trouble is, right now this one's elegant, efficient job is us." Sai made a sort of grunt, as if an awkward fact had just been pointed out. Still watching the screen, and with the first notes of strain in his tone, Frank said, "You're turning us straight into it." "Yes," she said. "I am. Frank, you've resented me from the moment I came aboard, haven't you? You'd like to see me fall flat on my ass. It's ironic, but if I do fail, not only will you not live to have your moment, but neither I nor anyone else will have an ass to fall on." "What do you want me to say? I'm sorry? All right, I'm sorry you came aboard." Ignoring this insubordination, Sai looked down at the image of the torpedo, closing with them. If the little bugger thinks it can think, let's give it something to think about. As Utopia Plane lined up on a collision course, the image of the torpedo visibly quivered. "I knew it!" said Sai triumphantly. "We're not acting like a target. Altering towards us confused it. It wants to play the think game? It doesn't have the humanity." She lay a finger on the approaching image. "My poor crazy baby," she murmured. You just don't know what it's all about." Torpedo and starship rushed together. Sai smiled at the scanner image of the torpedo, smiled at oncoming death like a child at some rare bauble. She opened an intership channel. "Listen up, this is the captain." Yes, it felt good to say that. "Secure all hatches and brace yourself. We will soon be experiencing sideways G-forces. That is all." Switching out, she said, "Frank, program the after gyros to pivot 90 degrees to port, then the forward gyros 90 degrees to port, then engage maximum acceleration. Execute on my word." "Sure, why not?" He returned to his position at astrogation, convinced he'd been right from the start, that an experiment gone all wrong now had command of the ship and was running it headlong into an equally insane torpedo. Just the same, he programmed the fore and aft gyros as instructed, because he was a creature of duty. He began chanting off the falling ranges. 600,000, 550, 500,000, 450. "Explode," Sai said quietly, finger on the image. "Detonate, my pretty." For it was a pretty thing, all rough, wrought beauty, the power and the glory. 400,000. "Explode." 300,000. "Silene tells you to explode." 250. "Go bang." 200,000. "It's too close. It'll kill us if it detonates now." She made a frantic shushing gesture, all the while not taking her eyes from the scan, not taking her finger from the image. "Detonate, crazy baby! Explode!" "Sai! Pivot!" The swing to port on aft gyros wrenched them all against their seat straps, crushing them breathless and dizzy. The second swing wrenched them in the opposite direction. Vision grayed to monochrome with blood pushing away from the eyes. Everything swirled and jarred and rocked as Utopia Plane turned sharp about in her own length, the drive kicking in with a scream of ragged power, slamming tilted gravity rings down the hull, accelerating away on a divergent course. And within the chaos came a silvery sound Sai could not place in her moments of gray blindness, a sound musical and glittering, rising above the noise of the drive, growing louder and bursting in upon her with disbelieving recognition. It was herself, laughing. As vision cleared, Sai caught her breath and watched the gap between the crazy torpedo and themselves widen on the screen. 100, 200, 300,000 kilometers. 4, 5, 6,000. "We need 10,000, she heard herself say as she heard Frank Peters yell, "Idiot machine, just human enough to..." At 9,000, the torpedo image blurred and was lost in a swell of light, obliterating everything on the screen. Instinctively, Sai braced herself for the shock against the fabric of space itself she knew the blast would deliver. For half a heartbeat, she saw Frank Peters similarly bracing, looking across at her with an expression that plainly said, "You were right, I was wrong." It almost gave her comfort to think it might be the last thing she'd see. The expanding, sparkling blur of light reached out for them and vanished. No killing shock came. A dark-haired man, early 30s and tall, stepped into the sudden silence of the control room. "Captain!" said Sai, engulfed in a flurry of emotions. Surprise, happiness, confusion. Realization the last few deadly minutes had been a drill, just another game. Understanding was also dawning on the faces of Frank Peters and the rest of the control room personnel. Sai stood up, not at all resentful she had been tested in this way, instead proud in the knowledge that the captain must now have faith in her, must have his approval. She looked for it in his eyes, his face, his expression. Approval was there, yes, but so was something else, something she had not expected to replace his waver of doubt. And as she recognized with a shock what she saw, Sai was back at the chessboard those few days ago, checkmated twice over, airing her dislike of stylized warfare, hearing Captain Brown quoting the Duke of Wellington's opinion of his troops. "I don't know what they do to the enemy, but by God they frighten me." She frightened him. She'd frightened him in the best way possible. "Helm, come to 091, he said, regaining his chair. "Mr. Gertch, close up at primary fire control." Utopia plane swung onto a new course, and Saida Gertch, stepping to the weapons control, said, "Aye, aye, sir," and went to war.
I do love the Saida Gertch stories by Rick. I love sci-fi because I grew up on Star Trek, but it's also probably because I'm part of the Mars generation who dream of going there and probably never will. And I really like Sai's particular brand of extremely competent and whimsical, with a side of anxious and just a smidge of crazy. I love that even though she's really green behind the ears, she's more than capable of proving her worth with the test in the best kind of way. And, like Wellington's troops at the Battle of Waterloo, she is a thing to frighten any commander. Something all of us should aspire to, I feel. We love bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but we can't do it without your support. Your donations pay our authors, our narrators, our servers, and our staff. Please consider supporting us with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, request us on Spotify, and consider the stories we publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. You can also join the discussion on the EA Discord, and visit us on Blue Sky at castofwonders.org. Come say hello! Cast of Wonders is brought to you by editor Catherine Inskip, assistant editor Alicia Caparasso, assistant editor Amy Brennan, associate editors Rebecca Ahn, Tanya Eidelit, Amy Brennan, Cup Jacob, Becca Miles, Ray O, Samuel Poots, Emma Smales, Denise Sudell, and Rin Yi. Our audio producer is Jeremy Carter. Cast of Wonders is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means that you can download or listen to the episode on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. Our theme music is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov, available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thank you for listening. Join us again soon.